it's a big debate. Let's watch a video clip. You know, take it for what it is, but I want you to understand that it is becoming a growing concern by many people. Some people think that the idea of peak oil is ludicrous, and they think it's a silly notion that we're going to ever have peak oil, that we're going to always be able to find additional oil sources, etc. But take it for what it's worth, but understand that it is a pretty controversial thing, and if indeed the naysayers, those who believe we're reaching peak oil, are correct, then we're going to have some big issues to face, as the video clip will talk about. So let's take a gander at this pretty lengthy video clip.
This evening, there's a new report out on peak oil released by the U.S. Government Accountability. The GAO says the U.S. is vulnerable and the government is unprepared for unacceptably high risks of oil supply shock. Now, first, let me tell you what this GAO report, which is the Government Accounting Office, concluded. Peak oil, which is the point of maximum production of oil, is followed by irreversible declines for oil fields around the world. They're saying peak oil is coming very soon. The report found most experts project a peak and subsequent decline in world oil production could occur without any warning anytime between now and 2040. Now, why such a wide range? The quality and the availability of data concerning oil reserves makes it very difficult to make accurate projections. It's a problem. We're going to talk about that. The report also discusses the many political and economic risks to worldwide production that show increasing risks of significant disruption to oil supplies. The report found no focused, coordinated government plans to prepare for peak oil or other potential supply disruptions. That's a problem. Joining me now, John Kilduff. He's the Senior Vice President of Energy Risk Management and an Energy Analyst at FEMAT USA, and also Matt Simmons, President and CEO of Simmons & Company International. He's author of The Twilight in the Desert, The Coming Oil Shock and the World Economy. Matt, let me start with you. You have written a book essentially on the subject, Twilight in the Desert. Is it true? Have we hit peak oil production, or are we near hitting peak oil production? And if so, what are the implications of that?
We actually, sadly, have such a poor data reporting system that we won't know with any clarity that we have passed peak oil until about a year after the event, or 2 years, when it's startlingly clear. This is a passionate issue to me because I spent effectively the last 5 years analyzing and digging into data, and I applaud the GAO today for what they did. I think that Congressman Bartlett and Congressman Udall need a big, rousing pat on the back for basically beginning the most serious discussion we've ever had about the single issue that could actually threaten sustainable society. And I believe, and I have for some time, that we are on the verge of actually replacing global warming by this term peak oil. It is not a kook issue. It's a reality. It's a physical reality. We have demand roaring ahead and supply is faltering.
John, help me out a little bit. I am thoroughly confused here. The U.S. Geological Survey says that there is plenty of oil in the world. Why is there so much disagreement? Why can't anyone agree on exactly how much oil there is in the world right now?
As Mr. Simmons just pointed out, we do struggle with the data. We do struggle. The Saudis say the same thing as the USGS, Bob, that we've only consumed 18% of the available oil. And we hear hopeful signs that there's plenty more oil to come. Tremendous discoveries in our own Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of Guinea. And even we see upticks in production from the former Soviet Union states. So I think and I don't think the GAO gave us much help here in saying it's between now and the next 40 years, basically, that we could hit peak oil. The service they did do, though, was what's going on right now as we're living through it. We're basically held hostage to countries that aren't that friendly to us in terms of owning most of the oil that's out there.
Matt, we know that there are declines in Mexico, for example, in their big fields. The North Sea field seems to be declining. Alaska seems to have certainly hit a peak at this point. But what about John's point there? Isn't it possible that we're going to discover vast new reserves, say, off the coast of Africa that are going to replace those declining reserves?
Anything is possible, but what's likely is that basically we might have a little bit of bump ahead in the next year or two, but the odds are at best 50-50. What's certain is that planned oil use was expected to go up 50%, and that's the impossibility. Yeah, and there is a likelihood that by this summer, demand will start to fast outstrip supply, and we could tolerate that for a few weeks, but then actually that smells shortage as opposed to high prices.
I want to bring up the demand again, but Matt, I want to go back to the supply point. of this. And John mentioned Saudi Arabia. Part of your book, a large part of it, is based on Saudi Arabia. You had access to a lot of information on Saudi Arabia's oil field. You conclude, or seem to conclude, that there's a lot of discrepancy in their numbers there. Does Saudi Arabia have as much oil as they claim to have?
They probably do. That isn't the issue. The issue is, do they have much high-quality, high-flow rate oil left? What Saudi's going to be left with is a vast, vast amount of oil with reservoir quality like the Austin Chalk, with heavy oil that's very hard to get out of the ground. What we're missing today are the fabulous oil fields. For instance, Cantarell, I just came from visiting Pemex 2 days ago. That's a disaster happening in front of our eyes. It's down 20%.
You're talking about the main Mexican oil field.
The main Mexican oil field that produces 6 out of every 10 barrels of oil from our friendliest supplier right across the border is now in irreversible decline. The big argument within Pemex, not argument, the discussion is, will 20% persist or might it ease off to 14? And the issue I raised on Tuesday is, might it rise to 25?
Yeah. John,
that is so dangerous for the United States economy, you cannot believe it.
John, let me turn to you. Even if there is some agreement that there's more oil in the world than, say, the GIO thinks, you wouldn't disagree with the idea that the U.S. is vulnerable regardless of how much oil is left right now, would you?
Not at all. Not at all, Bob. It's tremendously vulnerable. And it's almost too bad that prices fell off after the heights we saw last April, because we're again starting to take our eye off the ball. Some of the initiatives that are out there for the ethanol, for the biodiesel, which I think, and liquefied natural gas. There's a big plant Sempra Energy is building on the coast of Mexico that I was at 2 weeks ago. That's going to reverse the flow of natural gas. Instead of going to Mexico from the U.S., it's going to be going into the U.S. So thankfully, these high prices are pushing us ahead. And while the era of easy oil may be coming to an end, we're still going to have some difficult oil, and there's going to be, I think, plenty of oil out there in that regard. But we are just absolutely held hostage. When you go down the list of countries that hold most of the oil, like Venezuela, like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, we have big problems on our hands.
Matt Simmons, what do we need to do right now? Do we need to get more aggressive on alternative energy programs? And in a sense, there is a bit of a political agenda, I guess you could say, in people who are pushing the peak oil idea. And I'm not saying you are, but
I know most of the people pretty well now. I didn't 5 years ago. They're at the forefront of the peak oil discussion, and I don't think there is a single one of them that have a political agenda. I know I certainly don't. I also think that having spent 40 years understanding the mechanics of the oil business and following very closely throughout our entire firm, all the oil supply going on, all the natural gas supplies going on, knowing the relationship between oil, coal, and natural gas, fossil fuel era is basically waning as far as meeting the unbelievable insatiable demand, and we don't have any solutions. The best new oil basin we will ever find is called conservation.
That's a good point. All right, John Kilduff and Matt Simmons, thanks very much. This is not going away. We'll be talking about it in the future.
Wow, yeah. If they're right, then when we reach resource depletion, whenever that is, there's going to be a problem around the world, Right now, at least here in 2010, when I'm recording this, we've had some drop-off in oil production, and that's due primarily to this economic depression that we're in. But things could change, and if all of a sudden, the peak keeps going, it's going to eventually, we're going to run out. Okay, well, that concludes this podcast. We'll see you in class. Goodbye.